Imagine dedicating your entire life, just your entire career, to proving that the universe is nothing but matter.
Right, just atoms.
Yeah, exactly. Just atoms bumping into atoms, all governed by these cold, unfeeling physical laws.
No room for anything else.
Right. You build the most rigorous scientific frameworks. You argue with theologians. You push the boundaries of 19th century physics and biology. And all of it to prove that mind, spirit, and the soul are just, well, they're just illusions created by chemical reactions.
It's a massive undertaking.
It is. And then at the very end of your life, after following this logic to its absolute breaking point, you accidentally prove to yourself that matter doesn't actually exist at all.
I mean, it is the ultimate intellectual whiplash.
Totally.
You have this desperate, centuries-long pursuit to prove that everything is matter. And it culminates in the inescapable conclusion from one of history's top scientists, no less, that absolutely everything is mind.
It's wild.
Oh.
Well, welcome to Reformed Thinking. Today, we are embarking on a massive deep dive for you.
A really big one today.
Yeah. We are looking at the history of human philosophy, but not as a straight ascending staircase of progress. It's more like a precarious game of Jenga.
I love that analogy.
Right. Every generation of thinkers is basically trying to pull out another spiritual or theological block from the tower. And they assume the structure of human morality and consciousness will just magically stand on its own.
Until the whole thing inevitably collapses.
Exactly. And the specific tower we are examining today was meticulously mapped out by Charles Hodge in his monumental work, Systematic Theology.
Which is just a dense, brilliant text.
Oh, incredibly dense. We are diving into his rigorous analysis of what he calls anti-theistic theories.
And just to set the tone for you as we get into this, our mission today is to act as your guides through this material.
Right, because Hodge is arguing from a very classical, Reformed Protestant worldview.
He definitely is. But our goal here isn't to preach his conclusions at you.
No, not at all.
We want to impartially unpack the actual architecture of his arguments and, deeply explore the theories he is critiquing.
Yeah, we want you to fully grasp how humanity has, historically and philosophically, attempted to explain the universe without a personal God.
Yeah.
And why those attempts always seem to run into the exact same brick walls.
We are essentially mapping the territory.
Right.
And to do that properly, we have to start where Hodge starts, which is with absolute clarity on definitions.
Because the whole thing falls apart without them.
Exactly. The entire debate hinges on what we actually mean when we use the word God.
Okay, let's unpack this. Because Hodge draws a very firm, just an uncrossable line in the sand regarding what theism actually is.
He leaves no wiggle room.
None. It is not just, a vague spirituality. It's not that feeling you get when you look at a really beautiful mountain range.
Right. Hodge defines theism, and therefore the target that all these other theories are attacking, with incredible precision.
So what is the exact definition he uses?
He defines it as the doctrine of an extramundane personal God who creates, preserves, and governs all things.
Okay, let's break those two words down, because they really are the hinge of everything we are going to talk about today.
So sure.
Extramundane and personal.
So extramundane literally means outside of or distinct from the world or the physical universe.
Meaning God is not the universe.
Exactly. And the universe is not God. God exists independently of the material cosmos.
Got it. And personal, because that can be confusing.
Yeah, personal doesn't mean having a physical body with, arms and legs.
Right.
In philosophical terms, personality implies possessing consciousness, intelligence, and a free will.
So it's an entity that knows it exists, can think rationally, and can actually make choices.
Precisely. Therefore, anti-theism in Hodge's framework isn't just some fiery rejection of organized religion.
It's broader than that.
Much broader. It is any doctrine, any philosophical system that denies the existence of that specific kind of being.
Which casts an incredibly wide net for us today.
It really does. It covers everything from polytheism to pantheism to modern materialism.
But it also covers pure atheism. And what blew my mind reading this text is how Hodge treats pure atheism.
He kind of dismisses it, right?
He does. He essentially says it barely warrants its own philosophical category because it is just entirely negative.
It's an intellectual void.
Exactly.
Pure atheism affirms nothing. It builds no system. It simply looks at the assertion of theism and says, no.
But what's fascinating here is the historical baggage of the word itself.
Oh, the history is wild.
Yeah. Because you would think if someone doesn't believe in God, they'd just proudly own the title of atheist.
You would assume so today.
Right, but Hodge points out that historically, almost nobody wanted to be called an atheist. Thinkers would perform these jaw-dropping linguistic gymnastics to avoid the label.
Even when their philosophies explicitly destroyed the concept of a personal God.
Yes, the social and intellectual stigma was just profound.
Let's look at David Hume as an example.
Oh, the great Scottish skeptic.
Right, from the 18th century. Hume's philosophy systematically dismantled the rational proofs for God, for miracles, and even absolute morality.
He was brutal.
He was arguably the most potent skeptical mind of his era, yet he deeply resented being called an atheist.
Wait, really? He hated the term.
He despised it. He wanted to be seen as a gentleman of letters, a skeptic perhaps, but not something as vulgar as an atheist.
That is so funny.
Yeah.
And it wasn't just the British being polite either. The text highlights some wild examples from the French Enlightenment.
Like Helvetius.
Yes, Helvetius. This is a guy who looked around, realized he couldn't deny that things were moving and happening in the universe, and decided to just redefine God entirely.
He just changed the dictionary definition.
Literally. He argued that because everyone admits there is an active moving principle in nature, atheism doesn't actually exist. He literally wrote, he is not an atheist who says that motion is God.
Which is intellectually completely disingenuous. You can't take the word God, which for thousands of years has meant a conscious, intelligent creator, and just slap it onto the kinetic energy of a falling rock.
Just to save face at Parisian dinner parties.
Exactly. It's absurd.
It's like me saying, I'm not a vegetarian. I just redefined beef as a type of carrot. It makes no sense.
That's a perfect way to put it. And Victor Cousin, another French philosopher, did the exact same thing but with the mind.
What did he do?
He redefined God as the power of thought. He claimed that if you believe you exist, you believe in thought, and since thought is God, boom, you're a theist.
That is incredibly convenient.
It is, and we see the culmination of this evasion in the 19th century with Herbert Spencer.
Oh, the immensely influential English philosopher.
Right. Spencer tried to play the great peacemaker between religion and science.
How did he manage that?
He said, look, religion says there's a first cause. Science says there's a fundamental force driving evolution. They are talking about the exact same thing.
Oh, I see where this is going.
He called it the inscrutable force.
But there's a massive catch there.
Exactly. The catch is that Spencer's force has no consciousness.
Right.
It has no intelligence. It has no will. It cannot hear a prayer. And it did not design the universe with any purpose in mind. It is just blind, unyielding, physical energy.
Which brings us back to Hodge's uncrossable line.
Yes, it does.
Hodge calls this out brilliantly. He argues that language has rights.
Words have established meanings.
Exactly. You cannot hijack the vocabulary of theism to dress up your materialism. If you believe God is just gravity or evolutionary momentum or motion, you are an atheist according to the dictionary.
This raises an important question, though, and it's one Hodge tackles head-on.
Okay, what is it?
If so many brilliant philosophers have tried to erase the extramundane, personal God, is it actually psychologically possible to be a true atheist?
Oh, right. Can a human being genuinely, permanently strip that concept from their mind?
That's the question.
I wanted to ask you about this because Hodge's argument here feels incredibly bold to me.
It is a strong claim.
He argues, no, it's not truly possible. And as a skeptical reader, I have to push back a little for our listeners.
Sure.
I know people who confidently state they're atheists and seem perfectly comfortable with it. How does Hodge justify saying it's psychologically impossible?
We really have to understand his psychological framework here. Hodge distinguishes between the intellect and the fundamental constitution of human nature.
Okay, so the brain versus the gut. Kind of.
Sort of. If you ask, can a person, through intense philosophical speculation, convince their intellect to suppress the belief in God? Hodge says yes, absolutely.
You can argue yourself into anything.
Right. You can build a very complex, airtight syllogism in your head that concludes God doesn't exist.
He compares it to other extreme philosophical positions, doesn't he?
He does. He points out that philosophers have successfully convinced themselves of all sorts of things that completely contradict reality.
Like what?
Well, there are philosophers who have argued, quite logically, that the external physical world doesn't exist.
That it's all just an illusion in the mind.
Exactly. There are others who have argued that there is no fundamental difference between right and wrong.
That morality is purely a social construct.
Right. In a university seminar, you can talk yourself into anything.
But then you walk out of the seminar, somebody steals your wallet, and suddenly you're very convinced that the external world is real and that stealing is objectively wrong.
Precisely. And that is Hodge's point about atheism. The intellectual denial cannot overwrite the innate constitution of the human soul.
He uses this brilliant physical analogy here, doesn't he?
Yes, the analogy of a steel spring. Imagine a heavy-duty coil.
Okay, I'm picturing it.
You can apply a massive amount of physical force, the weight of skeptical philosophy, let's say, and compress that spring completely flat. You can hold it there.
But the tension is always there.
The tension never leaves. The moment that unnatural force is removed, perhaps in a moment of extreme crisis, danger, or even just sudden quiet clarity, the spring violently snaps back to its normal shape.
It just resets.
Exactly. The natural human constitution reasserts itself. Hodge argues that the sense of dependence on a higher power and the inward conviction of moral responsibility to a personal judge is hardwired into us.
So that's why you historically see people pass from radical skepticism to belief very suddenly.
Right. It's not because someone finally gave them the perfect logical argument. It's because the spring reset.
I think about this all the time when I look at modern culture.
How so?
Think about how often you see people doing exactly what Herbert Spencer did, just with updated vocabulary.
Oh, yeah, constantly.
People who completely reject organized religion will confidently talk about the universe trying to tell them something.
Or nature having a design for them.
Exactly. Or manifesting positive energy. It's that exact same linguistic impulse.
It really is.
It's the human mind desperately trying to acknowledge a governing purposeful power while stubbornly refusing to submit to an extramundane personal God.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, it demonstrates that pure negative atheism is incredibly difficult to sustain.
The human mind abhors a vacuum.
It does. If you pull the personal God out of the center of your worldview, you don't just sit comfortably with nothing. You immediately try to fill the hole with a replacement.
Which gives us the perfect transition to explore what early humanity did when they started pulling those Jenga blocks out.
Right. What did they replace it with?
Because if pure atheism is unnatural, what did our ancestors turn to instead?
Yeah.
How did we get all these other isms?
To understand this, we have to look at how Hodge interprets the historical timeline of religion.
And what's crucial here is that his timeline completely contradicts the dominant modern evolutionary assumption.
It completely flips it.
Right. Because the narrative we are usually taught, which was heavily popularized by 19th century thinkers, is that early humans were completely primitive.
They were terrified of lightning, so they worshipped rocks and trees.
Yeah, exactly. Then, as society advanced, they consolidated those spirits into a pantheon of gods. Right. And finally, after thousands of years of intellectual evolution, they arrived at monotheism, the belief in one God. A neat upward trajectory.
But Hodge, looking at the historical and textual evidence available, argues the exact reverse.
Really? The reverse?
Yes. He asserts that monotheism was not the final evolutionary achievement of religion. He says it was the original starting point of the human race.
And he backs this up with some pretty heavy historical receipts. He doesn't just quote the Bible.
No, he goes much broader. He points to the oldest written records of human religious thought we have.
Like the Vedas.
Exactly. He points to the earliest hymns in the Hindu Vedas. And he points to the Pentateuch, the first 5 books of the Hebrew Bible.
And what do those show?
In these ancient texts, you find clear, unadulterated concepts of one supreme, uncreated creator.
So the trajectory Hodge traces isn't one of upward evolution.
Not at all. It's a tragic story of devolution. It's a story of loss.
How does that devolution actually happen, practically speaking? I mean, if people started out knowing there was one God, how do you get from there to worshiping a river?
It starts with the corruption of the heart leading to the darkening of the mind.
Okay, unpack that.
As early humanity lost their spiritual connection to the extramundane creator, they still retained that psychological spring we talked about.
That innate sense of dependence.
Yes. So they looked around at their physical environment. They looked at the sun that grew their crops.
The fire that kept them warm.
Right, and the rivers that gave them water. They began to venerate these physical elements out of a desperate sense of dependence. This is pure nature worship.
But a river can't hear you. A fire doesn't care if you're cold.
Exactly. And the human mind craves a personal connection.
So what's the next step?
Personification. They began to imagine that behind the physical sun, there was a sun god.
Behind the violent ocean, an ocean god.
Right. Once you start personifying the disparate powers of nature, you have birthed polytheism. You have splintered the one creator into 1,000 fractured, localized deities.
And the text goes into this fascinating, almost terrifying detail about how this played out in ancient India with the development of pantheism.
Pantheism is a crucial concept to grasp here.
Help us define it.
It literally means all is God.
But Hodge notes that the Aryan tribes entering India actually had a deeply philosophical foundation initially, didn't they?
They did. They believed in an unknown, unconditioned, infinite being.
But here's the twist. This being doesn't create the universe out of nothing.
No.
This being becomes the universe.
Exactly. It revealed itself not as distinct persons, but as modes of manifestation.
And this is where you get the Hindu Trimurti, right?
Yes. Brahma the creator, Vishnu the preserver, and Shiva the restorer or destroyer.
But Hodge is very careful to clarify this.
He is. He clarifies that in strict philosophical pantheism, these aren't persons the way you and I are persons or the way a theist views God.
What are they then?
They're just temporary, fluid manifestations of the infinite whole.
And that leads to a really dark logical conclusion.
It gets very dark.
Because if pantheism says that literally everything is a manifestation of the divine infinite, then that inevitably spawns an endless, sprawling polytheism.
Because everything is God.
Right. If everything is God, then every remarkable person, every powerful animal, every terrifying storm is an avatar to be worshipped.
And here's where the logic turns vicious.
Yeah.
If the infinite encompasses absolutely everything in reality, then evil must be just as much a manifestation of the infinite as good is.
Oh, wow.
Destruction is as divine as creation.
Which means you end up with the worship of evil gods.
You do.
You have cults dedicated to deities of plague, of destruction, and terror, because philosophically those dark forces are just another legitimate face of the divine.
It's a worldview that completely obliterates the distinction between holy and unholy.
It's terrifying. And Hodge contrasts this heavy, fatalistic, philosophically driven Indian polytheism with the cultural flavors found in Europe, doesn't he?
He does, to show how religions morph to fit the societies that invent them.
Yeah, he points out that the Greeks, who were obsessed with beauty, art, and the human form, shaped their polytheism to be bright, poetic, and deeply sensual.
Their gods were essentially just superpowered humans with terrible behavior.
Exactly. But then you look at the Romans.
A very different culture.
Totally. The Romans were engineers, soldiers, administrators. They molded their gods to be sedate, decorous, and heavily focused on civic duty and law.
It perfectly illustrates how, once you lose the true extramundane god, the gods you invent will always end up being a mirror reflecting your own culture's desires and values.
It's fascinating. But while the masses were busy worshiping the sun and civic deities, the philosophers were trying to find a more elegant solution.
They wanted something cleaner.
Right. Because if everything being a manifestation of God feels too mystical and messy, especially with the problem of evil deities, how does a more logical, mechanically minded society solve the problem?
They try to merge the two.
Yes. They don't just say God is manifesting as everything. They say the universe itself is the living entity.
This brings us to a term that I'm guessing is new for a lot of people, Hylozoism.
I had to read this section a few times to really wrap my head around it.
Let's break it down. It comes from two Greek words, hyle, which means matter, and zoe, which means life.
Okay, matter and life.
Put them together, and Hylozoism is the doctrine that matter itself is intrinsically endued with life.
So it's not like animism where you think a ghost lives inside a tree.
No, it's much more sophisticated than that.
How did the ancients view it?
Well, in its most common philosophical form, particularly as it was developed by the ancient Stoics, Hylozoism assumes there is a distinction between mind and matter.
Okay.
But it considers them to be inseparably, permanently united. They believe the universe has a passive principle, which is inert, dead matter, and an active principle, which is mind or God.
It kind of reminds me of how people talk about the Force in Star Wars.
That is an excellent modern analogy.
Right. It's this active, organizing energy field that is intrinsically part of the physical universe. It binds the galaxy together, but it isn't sitting on a cloud somewhere making decisions.
The Stoics used a very specific illustration for this. They argued that God is to the physical world what the human soul is to the human body.
So God is the soul of the universe.
Exactly. God is the inward, organizing, plastic principle of the cosmos. Just as your soul animates your physical body, this active principle animates everything.
But wait, Hodge jumps on this analogy and completely rips it apart, doesn't he?
He absolutely dismantles it.
But I want to make sure I understand his critique here, because it feels like a fatal blow to the whole concept.
Hodge argues that the Stoics fundamentally misunderstand the relationship between the human soul and the human body.
How so?
Think about your own existence. Your soul, your conscious ego, does not consciously manage your biological functions.
Oh, right. I am not consciously orchestrating my cellular mitosis or directing my white blood cells or managing my digestion.
If you had to consciously remember to beat your own heart, you'd be dead in 5 minutes.
That is so true.
Those vital organizing functions happen autonomously beneath your conscious awareness. Your soul is independent of the biological machine. It merely inhabits it and uses it.
Okay.
But in Hylozoism, the soul of the world is literally defined as the very thing doing all the physical and biological organizing.
It is the force causing the planets to orbit and the plants to grow.
Exactly.
Which means it isn't a free, independent, conscious mind at all.
No, it's trapped in a machine.
It is a slave to the physical processes it is supposed to be directing. In Hylozoism, there is no personal God you can pray to, there is no freedom of the will, and therefore no such thing as sin or an afterlife.
You are just a tiny, insignificant cog in a massive, living, but ultimately blind and necessary universe.
Wow. And that realization is the critical turning point in our history of ideas for this deep dive.
It really sets the stage.
Because once you convince yourself that the universe is just a self-organizing machine without an outside creator, it is a very, very short philosophical step to strip away the living part entirely.
You just drop the mystical soul of the world.
And you are just left with a machine.
And that brings us directly to the doorstep of the most dominant, aggressive, anti-theistic theory of the modern era.
The final block pulled from the Jenga tower.
Materialism.
Yes.
Materialism is the system that ignores the distinction between mind and matter entirely.
It flattens everything.
Yes. It refers all phenomena, whether physical gravity, vital biological life, or mental consciousness, solely to the functions and properties of matter.
And I was absolutely floored to read where Hodge starts tracing this history.
It's surprising, isn't it?
Very. When we hear materialism, we usually think of the 19th century. We think of the Industrial Revolution, Darwin, men in laboratories. But Hodge doesn't start there.
He goes back over 2,000 years.
To Epicurus.
Yes, Epicurus.
We usually just associate him with the word Epicurean, like enjoying fine food and wine, you know. But his philosophy was hardcore.
What is genuinely startling is how accurately Epicurus, operating in ancient Greece without microscopes, without particle accelerators, without calculus, essentially predicted the foundational tenets of modern scientific materialism.
What did he actually teach? Because the text makes him sound like a 20th century physicist.
He taught that the universe has always existed. It was never created.
Okay, eternal universe.
He taught that space is infinite. And most importantly, he taught that absolutely everything is made of indestructible, indivisible particles called atoms.
He literally drafted the atomic theory.
He did. He argued that these atoms have peculiar forces and move through the void of space under the strict guidance of necessary physical laws.
And that by the blind combination and collision of these atoms over infinite time, the ordered cosmos just happened to emerge.
It's essentially the modern nebular hypothesis, just written in ancient Greek.
But he didn't confine this to just physics and astronomy, right?
Yeah. No, Epicurus had the courage of his convictions. He followed the materialistic logic all the way down into human psychology and ethics.
Which means?
If everything in the universe is just atoms and void, then the human soul must also be material.
It must just be made of finer, smoother atoms.
Exactly. And the ethical implications are immediate and devastating.
If the soul is just a temporary arrangement of atoms, it dissolves when the body dies.
There is no afterlife.
There is no ultimate judge.
Therefore, sensation is our only source of knowledge. And avoiding physical pain while maximizing physical pleasure is the only logical goal of human existence.
Virtue isn't an absolute moral good. It's just a pragmatic calculation to ensure you live a comfortable life.
It is verbatim what radical materialists argue today.
But Hodge points at a fascinating historical quirk here.
Epicurus didn't really win the day in the ancient world.
Right. Why didn't materialism catch on back then if it was so fully formed and ready to go?
Because it ran into the brick wall of Plato and Aristotle.
Ah, the heavyweights.
Yes. The higher, more intellectually rigorous philosophies of the ancient world, which argued strongly for mind, purpose, and the reality of the immaterial soul, utterly dominated the intellectual landscape.
So the world simply wasn't ready to accept pure materialism.
It had to wait centuries. It needed a new epistemological foundation, a new way of thinking about how we acquire knowledge.
And that brings us to the 17th and 18th centuries, the English pipeline. This is where the trap was carefully laid.
It starts with Thomas Hobbes in the 1600s.
Hobbes was brutal in his logic.
Very. He reduced all scientific investigation strictly to the doctrine of bodies and motion. For Hobbes, the mind itself is wholly material.
How did he explain consciousness then, if it's all material?
He argued that consciousness is just the direct, mechanical result of our physical sensory organs reacting to pressure and impact from external objects.
So an object hits your eye, the pressure travels to your brain.
And that pressure is the thought.
That feels very crude.
It is. But then we get to John Locke.
And here's where it gets really interesting, because John Locke was not a materialist.
No, he was a deeply religious man. He believed in God, he believed in the soul.
But in his attempt to solve a debate about human psychology, he accidentally handed the materialists the loaded gun they needed to destroy his own worldview.
This is one of the greatest examples in history of unintended philosophical consequences.
Walk us through it.
Locke was writing to combat the idea of innate ideas.
The belief that humans are born with certain concepts already preloaded in their minds, like the idea of God or the rules of logic.
Right. Locke said no, the human mind at birth is a tabula rasa, a blank slate.
Imagine a completely blank whiteboard.
Exactly. Locke argued that all our ideas must come from experience, and he proposed two sources of experience: sensation and reflection.
So sensation and reflection.
Sensation is how our physical senses interact with the external world, seeing the color red, feeling the heat of a fire. These create simple ideas.
Intersection.
Reflection is the mind turning inward, observing its own operations, and combining those simple ideas to form complex abstractions like justice, infinity, or God.
It sounds perfectly reasonable. Where did he go wrong?
He didn't go wrong in his own mind, but his definitions were slightly ambiguous. His materialistic followers looked at his system and surgically removed the second half.
They just threw out reflection.
Yes. They argued, wait a minute, if reflection is just the brain processing previous sensations, then reflection isn't a separate source of knowledge at all.
Sensation is the only source of knowledge.
Exactly.
Oh, I see. They collapsed the system.
And once you do that, the materialists pounce.
They said, okay, Locke proved we only know what we can sense, and our physical senses can only detect material things.
Therefore, logically, only material things exist.
Wow. Locke tried to build a sensible theory of psychology, and he accidentally opened a door that led Epicurus right back into the room.
And once that door was open, a thinker named David Hartley walked right through it.
And he tried to map this new philosophy onto actual human anatomy, didn't he?
He did. Hartley is fascinating because he was a physician. You can see how his daily medical practice influenced his philosophy.
He wanted to merge psychology entirely into physiology.
Yes. He developed the theory of vibrations.
Let's explore the mechanics of how he thought this worked, because it illustrates the massive leap materialists have to make.
Hartley argued that your nerves are essentially like physical strings.
Like guitar strings.
Kind of. When external objects interact with you, light hitting your retina, sound hitting your eardrum, it causes a physical vibration in the nerve.
Okay, that vibration travels up the nerve string into the brain.
Specifically into the medullary substance of the brain.
And Hartley's claim was that this physical vibration in the brain is the sensation.
Yes. Not that it causes the sensation, but that the mechanical shaking of brain matter is literally what a feeling is.
And when those vibrations repeat spontaneously later on, those are what we call memories or ideas.
So, in this view, thought is literally just the physical jiggling of brain matter.
Which leads to what might be my absolute favorite part of Hodge's entire book.
The critique?
Yes. He quotes a critique of Hartley's theory from the Edinburgh Review. It is one of the most vivid, devastating, and frankly hilarious takedowns I've ever read.
The reviewer strips away all the complex medical jargon and forces the reader to look at the physical reality of what Hartley is actually claiming.
Right. The reviewer says, okay, let's pretend we have magical microscopic eyes.
We can shrink down, look inside the human skull,
and see exactly what Hartley is describing. What would we actually see when a person is experiencing profound love or contemplating a complex mathematical theorem?
We would see a whitish, half-fluid substance, roughly the consistency of custard, Shaking.
Literally just shaking. We'd see particles of brain matter moving up and down, right or left, roundabout, or in a zigzag pattern.
The famous zigzag throbbings of custard.
Yes, I love that phrase. The zigzag throbbings of custard.
Yeah.
And the reviewer just stops and points out the sheer absurdity of the claim.
Motion is just motion.
Exactly. It has direction and velocity. You can measure a zigzag. But it is utterly unmeaning, it is linguistic nonsense to say that a zigzag motion of white fluid is the subjective feeling of love or the concept of justice.
You haven't explained the experience of thought at all.
You've just described shaking custard.
It's a brilliant critique because it highlights the impassable chasm between objective physical movement and subjective qualitative consciousness.
Knowing exactly how the brain shakes does not explain who is experiencing the shaking.
But while the British were having these very polite, witty, literary debates in journals,
Publishing clever critiques about custard.
the actual ideas were migrating across the English Channel.
And that brings us to the French climax.
It does, because the French intellectuals took these English seeds, stripped away all the polite religious caveats, and watered them with absolute radicalism.
The speed of the escalation in France was breathtaking.
You start with Condillac, who took Locke's philosophy, threw out reflection entirely, and officially declared that all thoughts, all human faculties, are nothing more than transformed sensations.
Then you get Lemaitre.
Who just abandons all subtlety.
He publishes a book literally titled Man a Machine. He argued that humans are just highly complex clockwork automatons wound up by our environment.
And finally, it reaches its absolute zenith with Baron Tolbach and his system of nature.
Which became the Bible of French materialism.
Tolbach was entirely uncompromising. Matter and motion are eternal. There was no creation.
The human will is an illusion.
It is merely the necessary reaction to the strongest physical sensation.
There is no freedom, no objective morality, no future existence, and absolutely no God.
He pulled out every single Jenga block at once.
He really did. And when these ideas permeated the popular mind in France, removing all sense of ultimate accountability or divine order, it laid the philosophical groundwork for the bloodshed and total upheaval of the French Revolution.
If man is just a machine, and there is no God, then you can dismantle and rebuild society by any violent means necessary.
But out of the ashes and chaos of the revolution, a new figure emerged.
Someone who tried to build a new, orderly, scientific utopia on these purely material foundations.
Auguste Comte.
The father of positivism.
Comte is such a fascinating, tragic, and pivotal figure in the history of thought.
He spent most of his life in crushing poverty, often struggling with his mental health, but his lectures on philosophy changed the world.
Positivism, as the name suggests, claims to be entirely positive.
It purports to assume nothing, guess at nothing, and accept nothing beyond observed, verifiable facts.
For Comte, the physical senses are the absolute boundary of reality.
Therefore, theology, the study of God and psychology, the study of the internal soul, must be entirely banished from the domain of legitimate human inquiry.
He was militant about this, wasn't he?
He insisted we have to stop looking for causes. He said it is childish to look for a first cause, like God, and it is equally childish to look for final causes, like a purpose or design in nature.
So what is left?
All that actually exists in reality is sequence and resemblance.
Event A happens, and then event B happens. That's it.
You drop a rock, it falls, the sun comes up, it gets warm.
Our only job as humans is to observe the sequence, catalog the resemblances, and deduce the physical laws so we can predict the future.
Don't ask why the rock falls, just measure how fast it falls.
And to justify this worldview, Comte built his entire system on a sweeping theory of history he called the law of the three stages.
He claimed that the human race as a whole, and actually every individual human mind as it grows up, necessarily passes through 3 phases of intellectual development.
Walk us through these stages, because this framework is still subconsciously believed by a lot of people today.
Stage 1 is the theological stage. This is the infancy of humanity. In this stage, we don't understand how the world works, so we attribute all phenomena to supernatural beings. A storm is the wrath of a god. A disease is a demon.
And stage 2.
The metaphysical stage. This is humanity's adolescence. We realize gods aren't throwing lightning bolts, but we still cling to unseen abstract forces.
We explain things by appealing to nature wanting balance, or a mystical vital force in living things.
We abandon the personal gods, but keep the unseen magic.
And finally, stage 3.
The positive stage. Human maturity.
Where we abandon all unseen forces.
All ultimate causes and all theology. We rely solely on observable physical facts, measurable data, and mathematical laws. Science replaces religion entirely.
It sounds so clean,
Yeah.
so incredibly progressive and logical.
But Hodge, and surprisingly, the agnostic scientist Thomas Huxley, absolutely dismantle Comte's grand historical theory.
The historical inaccuracies are just glaring, aren't they?
First, as we discussed earlier regarding the devolution of religion, the historical record shows that monotheism came first, not primitive, theological fetishism.
History runs in the exact opposite direction of Comte's first stage.
But the cultural blind spot is what really destroys it. Hodge points specifically to India to prove that Comte's universal law of human development is just a Western Eurocentric fantasy.
Right, because the Hindus are an incredibly ancient, deeply intellectual race.
Their grasp of language, mathematics, and intricate philosophy rivals or exceeds ancient Greece and Rome.
They anticipated the complexities of modern German idealism thousands of years ago.
By Comte's law, they should be the most scientifically positive, materialistic culture on Earth.
But they are the exact opposite.
They are the least materialistic culture imaginable.
For traditional Hindu philosophy, the physical world is Maya, an illusion. The spiritual realm is the only true reality.
They utterly shatter Comte's central claim that intellectual maturity inevitably leads to materialism.
And Thomas Huxley, who didn't even believe in God, pointed out that Comte's law is constantly contradicted by everyday reality.
You have brilliantly positive, realistic, fact-driven individuals in primitive societies.
And you have highly educated, mathematically gifted scientists in modern societies who deeply believe in God.
The three stages aren't mutually exclusive evolutionary steps. They are different ways of thinking that exist simultaneously in the human heart.
But I want to zero in on the bizarre, almost unbelievable irony of Comte's actual life.
Oh, this is the best part.
Because his life story proves Hodge's psychological argument about the spring of human nature better than any theological textbook could.
It is one of the most tragicomic episodes in the history of philosophy.
Comte spent his entire life trying to build a perfect, rational society without God or king. He banished theology, banished the soul, banished the unseen.
But at the end of his life, he realized a horrifying truth.
What was it?
Human beings are fundamentally worshiping creatures.
You cannot bind a society together with mathematical equations.
People need rituals. They need awe. They need religion.
So what does the grand architect of purely observable facts do?
He panics, and he invents his own religion from scratch.
He called it the religion of humanity. Wait, hold on. You're telling me the guy whose entire brand, his whole life's work, was that only measurable physical facts exist, ended up designing a religion?
He did?
How does someone even rationalize that leap? Who do they pray to?
He realized the necessity of worship, but his system forbade worshiping a creator, so he substituted the creation.
Okay, meaning what?
The object of worship in his new religion was the great being, which was simply the continuous aggregate memory of all the great men and women who had ever lived in advanced humanity.
You worship the collective memory of human achievement.
Yes.
It gets weirder.
It does.
For private worship, because he had this deeply complicated, idealized relationship with a woman named Clotilde Deveau, he believed woman was the most perfect representative of humanity.
So he instituted a private cult where men were supposed to worship the ideal woman.
Specifically their mother, wife, and daughter.
He wrote a 400-page catechism for this religion.
He instituted 10 sacraments.
He designed a new architecture for positivist temples that were supposed to replace churches.
He created a new calendar. He essentially tried to reinvent Roman Catholicism, minus Christ, minus God.
And he naturally set himself up as the absolute infallible high priest.
A positivist pope.
It is the ultimate vindication of Hodge's spring analogy. You can forcefully kick God out the front door with your rigid positivist philosophy, but the innate human need to worship will just sneak back in through the window.
Usually in a deeply distorted, almost farcical form.
But here is the critical pivot in our story.
Right.
Comte's specific religion of humanity became a laughingstock. Nobody wanted to attend his temples. It faded away.
But his core epistemological idea, the idea that only physical, measurable, observable forces exist and that the unseen is irrelevant, that idea survived.
It was picked up, sanitized of its weird cultic aspects, and supercharged by the incredible scientific boom of the late 19th century.
And this transition brings us into the realm where philosophy finally puts on a lab coat. We are moving into scientific materialism and the great protoplasm debate.
This era starts with what was genuinely a massive, world-changing breakthrough in physics.
The discovery of the correlation and conservation of physical forces.
It was a beautiful era of discovery. You had scientists like Count Rumford.
What did he do?
He was overseeing the boring of brass cannons for the military. He noticed that the mechanical friction of the drill generated a massive, seemingly endless amount of heat.
Enough to boil water, right?
Exactly. Before this, people thought heat was a physical substance.
An invisible fluid called caloric that was just like squeezed out of things.
Right. But Rumford, and later brilliant experimentalists like Dr. Joule, proved that heat isn't a fluid.
Heat, light, electricity, magnetism, they're not separate things. They're all just different modes of motion.
And crucially, they are convertible into one another.
Mechanical friction can be converted into heat. Heat can be converted into electricity. Electricity can be converted into light.
And it wasn't just qualitative, it was quantitative. Joule proved that a specific amount of mechanical energy will always produce an exact, predictable amount of heat.
Nothing is lost. It just changes form. It is the law of the conservation of energy.
It was elegant, undeniable physical truth.
But then the biologists and the philosophers looked at this triumph in physics, and they made a massive speculative leap.
Right. Figures like John Tyndall, Thomas Huxley, and our old friend Herbert Spencer took this principle of physical correlation and applied it directly to biology and psychology.
They argued that if physical forces like heat and light are correlated and convertible, then vital forces, the biological forces of life, and mental forces, the forces of human thought, must just be the next links in the chain.
They must just be transformed physical energy.
Walk me through their logic on this. How do you get from a boiling pot of water to a human thought using only physics?
The logic went like this. The sun radiates physical energy as heat and light. A plant absorbs that physical energy and, through chemical processes, transforms it into the vital structure of a leaf.
Okay, following.
A sheep eats the leaf and transforms that vital energy into the mechanical energy of muscle movement. A human eats the sheep, and the human brain transforms that physical energy into the mental energy of a thought.
So thought is just solar energy that is passed through a digestive tract.
That was the explicit claim. It's all just one unbroken, closed-loop chain of physical correlation.
No soul required, no creator needed, just sunlight and digestion.
And Thomas Huxley became the great evangelist for this idea. He delivered a famous lecture on what he called the physical basis of life.
And he introduced a concept that became the battleground for decades. He argued that all life, from the lowliest fungus on a log to the most brilliant human being, is made of the exact same foundational substance.
Protoplasm.
And Huxley was very clear about what protoplasm is, wasn't he?
If you take this living matter and break it down chemically, it is simply carbonic acid, water, and ammonia.
Which are entirely lifeless chemicals.
Completely lifeless.
Yeah.
It's just carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen.
Huxley's bold argument was that when you bring these lifeless inorganic chemicals together under certain specific conditions, they inevitably form protoplasm.
And this protoplasm naturally exhibits the properties we call life.
Okay, but how does he justify that? How do dead chemicals suddenly start reproducing and acting alive without an outside spark?
To defend this, Huxley used an analogy that Hodge spends a massive amount of time breaking down.
Let's call it the aquosity argument.
And I have to admit, when you first read Huxley's argument, it sounds incredibly persuasive.
It is a masterful piece of rhetorical judo. Huxley says, look at water. We all know water is H2O, 2 parts hydrogen, 1 part oxygen.
Hydrogen is an invisible, lifeless gas. Oxygen is an invisible, lifeless gas. Neither of them is wet. Neither of them can freeze into ice.
But when you run an electric spark through a mixture of these gases, they combine, and instantly you have water.
And the water has entirely new, emergent properties that the component gases don't possess.
Exactly. But, Huxley points out, we don't invent a magical, unseen, mystical force called aquosity to explain the wetness of water.
We don't say the spirit of aquosity entered the gases.
We just scientifically accept that the new properties of water are simply the necessary result of its molecular arrangement.
The geometry of the molecules creates the properties.
And he takes that exact template and drops it onto biology.
Yes. He says, if the properties of water result solely from the nature and disposition of its molecules, why should we assume a magical, unseen force called vitality or the soul to explain life?
The properties of protoplasm breathing, growing, reproducing are just the inevitable result of the complex molecular arrangement of carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen.
Life is just complex chemistry.
Okay, stop right there, because I want to use Dr. Stirling's counter-argument, which Hodge quotes at length because it absolutely obliterates Huxley's analogy.
Unpack it for us.
It's the watch analogy. Huxley compares making water to making life. But Dr. Stirling points out a fatal flaw.
Use it.
Breaking down water into hydrogen and oxygen is one thing. They are all on the exact same plane of existence, the unorganized chemical plane. But breaking down a complex living organism into carbon and nitrogen is not like breaking down water. It is like breaking down a highly complex mechanical pocket watch into a pile of brass, steel, and glass.
That is a crucial shift in perspective.
Right. If you smash a watch with a hammer and weigh the raw brass and steel, the raw materials perfectly account for the weight of the watch.
Just like the carbon and nitrogen perfectly account for the weight of the human body.
Exactly. But the pile of brass and steel does not replace the idea of the watch. The raw metals cannot account for the intricate organization, the purposeful design, the gears moving in concert to tell time.
And that exposes the sleight of hand in Huxley's aquosity argument. Water doesn't have an architectonic principle.
Water doesn't organize itself to achieve a future goal. A puddle doesn't try to become a better puddle.
But living protoplasm does. It builds an eye with the specific purpose to see light. It builds a heart with the specific purpose to pump blood.
The chemical elements are just the passive building blocks. They're not the active builder.
As Stirling brilliantly summarizes, life is an entirely new and infinitely higher world. It is the world of a self-realizing thought.
Huxley's analogy completely ignores the profound addition of design and organization.
The gap between dead, chemically synthesized protoplasm in a test tube and living protoplasm in a cell isn't chemical. Chemically, they are identical.
The gap is the impassable, infinite gulf between life and death.
And this devastating failure of materialism, its inability to account for design, for organization, for consciousness, and for life itself, leads us directly to Hodge's ultimate systematic refutation of the entire materialistic project.
Hodge organizes his final refutation into a brilliant three-pronged attack. He doesn't just quote scripture. He meets the materialists on their own philosophical ground.
He argues that materialism fundamentally contradicts the inescapable facts of consciousness, the intuitive truths of reason, and the observable facts of experience.
Let's take them one by one, starting with consciousness.
This is where Hodge turns the tables on the scientists.
He says that the most foundational, undeniable principle of all human knowledge isn't a mathematical formula or a chemical reaction. It is self-knowledge.
Before I know that a rock falls or that the sun shines, I know that I exist to observe it.
I know that I am a real objective entity, an ego, that is distinct from the physical body I inhabit. My body is the organ I use, but the body is not me.
And this isn't just a religious dogma imposed from the outside. It is the universal, inescapable testimony of human consciousness across all cultures and times.
Materialism asks us to completely deny this primary data point.
It asks us to believe that the brain is doing the thinking, that the feeling of a distinct ego is just a chemical illusion.
But Hodge corners them with this logic. If we can't trust our own consciousness when it tells us we are a distinct, free, moral agent,
on what possible grounds should we trust our consciousness when it reports the data of our physical senses?
it is a fatal epistemological contradiction.
If my internal sensation of having a self is a biologically determined lie, why is my external sensation of seeing a microscope or reading a thermometer telling the absolute truth?
If the instrument of consciousness is fundamentally a liar, then the whole foundation of empirical science collapses into utter skepticism.
You can't selectively trust consciousness only when it supports your materialistic theory. It's intellectually bankrupt.
Which brings us to the second prong, reason.
Hodge argues that it is an intuitive, self-evident truth of reason that every effect must have an adequate cause. The cause must be capable of producing the result.
We touched on this with the watch analogy.
Unintelligent, blind physical forces like gravity or chemical affinity or magnetism act by strict necessity. They have no foresight. They have no plan.
Therefore, it violates the most basic laws of human reason to claim that blind forces can produce highly intelligent, incredibly complex, purposeful effects.
You cannot get intelligence out of non-intelligence.
You cannot get purposeful design, like the intricate acoustic structure of the human ear, or a library full of encyclopedias out of atoms blindly colliding in the dark.
To claim otherwise is not science. It is a leap of faith far greater than believing in a creator.
And that leads to the third prong, experience. Hodge appeals directly to the observable facts of the natural world.
He divides existence into four spheres: the mineral, the vegetable, the animal, and man.
And he points out the most stubborn, unyielding fact of universal human experience. Dead matter never becomes living matter on its own.
A rock never spontaneously decides to turn into a fern.
Never. The lifeless elements of the mineral kingdom, carbon, nitrogen, oxygen, only become living organic matter when they are violently taken up, synthesized, and organized by pre-existing living matter.
A plant has to reach down its roots and pull the dead minerals up into the realm of life.
Life only ever comes from antecedent life. Materialism requires dead matter to suddenly wake up and organize itself into a living cell, which contradicts absolutely every single observation in the history of human experience.
But what I find absolutely fascinating in Hodge's refutation, and this is something we really need to emphasize, is that he doesn't just rely on theologians to make his case.
He points out that there was a massive scientific mutiny happening within the scientific community against this materialistic overreach.
Top-tier physicists and biologists were standing up and saying, no, you are pushing the physics too far.
One of the most prominent was Professor Joseph Henry, the first secretary of the Smithsonian Institution, and a giant in electromagnetism.
He pushed back against the idea that biological life is just converted physical energy by using a brilliant mechanical analogy.
The locomotive analogy, I love this. Break this down for us.
Henry says, imagine a massive, powerful steam locomotive sitting on the tracks. Its firebox is full of burning coal. Its boiler is full of high-pressure steam.
It contains an immense amount of potential physical energy.
But it just sits there. It is in a state of dynamic equilibrium.
It has the power to move, but it doesn't move.
Exactly. It only comes alive, rushes forward, switches tracks, stops, and reverses. Because an engineer, a controlling conscious intellect, steps into the cab and gently opens the valve.
The physical force of the steam is there, but it is completely undirected and useless without the mind of the engineer.
The steam doesn't decide where the train goes.
And Henry applies this directly to biology. The food we eat, the carbon, the proteins, provides the raw physical energy for our bodies.
But the mind, the vital soul, acts as the engineer.
The mind directs that physical energy to accomplish a specific purpose. Whether it's building a muscle, healing a wound, or typing a sentence, the mind is not made of physical force, it directs it.
And then you have President F.A.P. Barnard of Columbia College, who delivered a speech that completely dismantled the idea that a human thought is just a correlated form of physical heat or electricity.
His argument is incredibly simple, but absolutely devastating.
He attacks it from the angle of measurement.
Right. Barnard points out that the defining characteristic of physical forces is that they can be quantified and measured.
You can measure heat in degrees or joules. You can measure electrical output in volts and amps. You can measure mechanical energy in foot-pounds.
But you cannot, under any circumstances, measure a thought.
You can't put a ruler to justice.
You can't say, I just had a 3-pound thought about mathematics, or I'm experiencing a 6-inch feeling of profound sorrow.
It is a complete category error. Barnard's logic is inescapable. A thing that cannot be measured cannot possibly be a physical quantity.
And if it isn't a physical quantity, it cannot be a correlated physical force. Thought belongs to an entirely different realm of existence.
And Barnard follows this up with a linguistic argument that I just have to share. It's so brilliant.
Let's hear it.
He says, imagine you walk up to a Frenchman and you insult him viciously, but you do it in English.
Assuming he doesn't speak a word of English, nothing happens. He just stares at you.
But then you translate the exact same insult into French. Suddenly, his face flushes hot, his heart rate spikes, his muscles tense up, and he flies into a violent physical rage.
Now, as a physicist, you have to ask, what just caused that massive output of physical, mechanical energy in the Frenchman's body?
It wasn't the physical sound waves of your voice.
The decibels. The physical pressure hitting his eardrum were identical in both languages. The physical force was the same. What changed was the meaning of the words.
And meaning is not a physical force. Meaning has no mass, no velocity, no chemical composition.
Yet that completely immaterial meaning was the direct activating cause of a massive physical reaction.
It perfectly demonstrates that mind and meaning act upon matter. They direct matter, but they are absolutely not made of matter.
So we've walked through centuries of these attempts. From the linguistic dodging of the 18th century through the ancient atoms of Epicurus, past the bizarre positivist cults of Auguste Comte, right up to the protoplasm of the 19th century.
Where does this obsessive, unrelenting drive to reduce everything to mere matter and motion actually end up?
This brings us back to the grand, mind-bending irony we teased at the very beginning of the deep dive, and it's found in the life and writings of Alfred Russel Wallace.
Wallace is a massive figure in the history of science.
He was Charles Darwin's associate. He literally co-discovered the theory of evolution by natural selection independently of Darwin.
He was as steeped in the scientific materialism of the 19th century as any human being could possibly be.
Wallace spent his entire life immersed in these physical theories. But unlike many of his peers, he kept following the logic ruthlessly to its ultimate end.
And eventually he realized the fatal, insurmountable flaw in the materialistic project.
What did he realize?
He realized that you can add 1,000 or 1,000,000 or 1,000,000,000 unconscious material atoms together, and they will never, ever suddenly cross the chasm and become a self-conscious entity.
It is mathematically and philosophically impossible.
But here's where the whiplash happens. Because Wallace was so deeply conditioned by the scientific dogma of his day to believe that the universe must be a single, unified system, that physical forces and mental forces must somehow be the exact same thing, he couldn't bring himself to accept the classical theistic answer.
He couldn't accept that matter and mind are two distinct realities created by an extramundane God.
No. Instead of elevating mind to its proper place alongside matter, Wallace performed the ultimate philosophical inversion.
He concluded that matter doesn't exist at all.
It is stunning.
He decided that what we call matter is just an illusion.
He concluded that all physical force, gravity, electromagnetism, chemical bonds is actually just the direct product of will.
The entire physical universe, the atoms, the stars, the protoplasm, is nothing more than the active, ongoing thought of a supreme intelligence.
He completely crossed over from hard-nosed scientific materialism into a kind of hyper-spiritual, idealistic pantheism.
The desperate, centuries-long attempt to prove that absolutely everything is just dead matter literally resulted in one of the world's top scientists concluding that absolutely everything is mind.
It proves Hodge's central thesis perfectly.
Any theoretical system that denies the fundamental innate truths of human nature, our undeniable consciousness, the laws of our reason, our moral sense of right and wrong, will eventually buckle under its own weight.
It will collapse into absurdity. You can try to pull the Jenga blocks out, but the tower will always fall.
We have covered an immense amount of intellectual ground today for you, from the ancient Stoics to the laboratories of the 19th century.
And through it all, we've seen a remarkably consistent pattern.
The attempt to reduce the universe to a blind machine consistently crashes into the undeniable realities of the human ego, the absolute necessity of intelligent design, and the impassable gulf between the dead chemical and the living soul.
The classical theistic worldview, as Hodge so rigorously presents it, isn't just a defensive religious dogma. He presents it as the only philosophical system, the only framework that actually accounts for all the facts of human experience.
It provides the only adequate, rational cause for the incredible, purposeful effects we see in the universe and in ourselves.
Now, before we sign off, we want to leave you with one final provocative thought. Something for you to mull over the next time you hear someone claiming that science has disproved the soul.
Think about this. The core claim of materialism is that every single thought you have, every emotion you feel, and every deep conviction you hold is strictly the necessary result of blind, predetermined chemical reactions happening in your physical brain.
Just atoms colliding.
Exactly. But if that premise is true, then the materialist's own deep belief in the theory of materialism is also just a chemical reaction.
It's just a specific arrangement of carbon and nitrogen molecules in their brain, reacting mechanically to environmental stimuli.
Which means they didn't choose to believe it based on logic. Their brain chemistry just forced them to believe it.
Precisely. But if a belief is just an inevitable, physically determined chemical reaction, on what possible grounds can anyone claim that belief is actually true?
A chemical reaction isn't true or false. It doesn't possess moral or logical weight. It just is. Vinegar and baking soda reacting isn't a true reaction or a false reaction. It's just physics.
That is absolutely mind-bending. By claiming that all human thought is determined by blind physics, materialism destroys the very concept of objective truth.
It cuts off the branch it's sitting on. If everything is just the zigzag throbbings of custard, then the brilliant scientific theory of materialism is just shaking custard too. It means nothing.
It is the ultimate self-defeating philosophy.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into Reformed thinking. We hope this exploration helps you navigate these ideas the next time you encounter them. We encourage you to keep reading, keep thinking deeply, and keep questioning the philosophical assumptions that are so often smuggled inside the Trojan horse of modern science. The foundational truths of the universe are there, waiting to be understood. We'll see you next time.